Morning, everybody, and welcome to this Public Health Community Safety Cabinet panel today on Wednesday, the 7th of September. Good to see everyone here. May I first of all read the following announcement that this meeting of the PH and CS Cabinet panel is being filmed and webcast live on the internet and will also be recorded and published on the Council's website. All parts of the room can be seen or heard by the camera or microphones, and any members of the press and public present in the Council chamber at any time during the meeting are likely to be included in the webcast and the recording. Members are reminded that seats have been allocated and programmed into the webcasting system to assist with the webcasting. We ask that you all remain in the seats allocated to you and that you use the microphone allocated to that seat. For the Christmas meeting, we may play some music and everyone can change seats and you sit down, but that's only for the Christmas meeting. Speaker scheduling. The speaker scheduling system will be in operation at this meeting. Members and officers are asked to note that microphones will not automatically go live when pressed. The meeting and order of speakers will be controlled by me and administered by the Democratic Services team. To use the system, members must press their microphone button to indicate that they wish to speak, and it will illuminate green, and the microphone will be made live when called to speak, and it will illuminate red. For those members who are joining us virtually, and there are three, I'll introduce them in a moment, please use the raised hand function on Teams, and that will alert me here on one of various screens that you wish to speak. Please keep your microphones on mute until I call you to speak, and then please turn them on, and your camera if you're able to when you're speaking. And also to vote, you'll need to turn your camera on and raise your hand so I can see which way if you've voted. So I hope that's quite clear. It sounds more complicated than it is. We've been doing it for a while now and everyone seems to be getting on fine with the system. Membership changes for this morning. I have Peter Hebden, who's substituting for David Barnard, and I have Sally Symington here in the chamber. Welcome, who's substituting for Sarah Bedford. I have apologies from the Executive Director of Public Health, Jim McManus, who sends his apologies for this meeting because the University of Hertfordshire are conferring an honorary doctorate of science on him this morning in recognition of his public health work. And I can think of no finer public servant to receive that at this time after the work that he's done. And he did need a few more letters after his name, did he not? As I explained to him a few months ago, it looked like someone had tipped a Scrabble board over his name, and whatever fell became his title afterwards. But he is one of the most important and highly respected of our officers, done an astonishingly good job over the last couple of years. I'm delighted to offer congratulations to him on the conferring of an honorary doctorate of science upon him. We move now. The Police and Crime Commissioner and the Deputy Police and Crime Commissioner send their apologies. They have a district day at Three Rivers today. And there is no truth in the rumour that during the very hot weather it became Two Rivers. That is just a vicious rumour. But sorry that David and Lewis aren't here today. Brings the length of the meeting down slightly. Members' interest, please ask. Oh, sorry, that's my instructions. Do any members have any declarations of interest they would like to make in connection with any items on the agenda? Just looking in the chamber, looking on the screen. No. Every member's got the name by them, so if and when they speak, you'll know who is speaking. Can I welcome online? We have from the committee, we have Stella Nash. From our Hatfield studios, we have Peter Hebden. From our Hitchin base, we have Judy Billing. You're all welcome. Yes, lots of waves there. We'll welcome your scores later on. Item 1, minutes. Can I invite the panel to agree the minutes of the Public Health and Community Safety Cabinet panel meeting held on the 4th of July? Thank you. Expertly chaired, if I may say so, by the Vice Chairman, Rena Ranger. Thank you so much. Item 2, petitions for today's meeting. There are none. Okay, so it would be now item 3, an update report from David Lloyd, the Police and Crime Commissioner for Hertfordshire. And I'm sorry that they're not here because obviously it would have been very useful to have had a representative to have taken some questions, but we haven't got one on this occasion. If we do have any questions, can we please email them to Carly Stratton, and she'll make sure that those questions are passed on. So there are the recommendations are to note content. Do we have? Okay, so we can take questions by email, but we can note the content of the report. Yeah, is that right? Okay, colleagues, you've had the report. We just note, I just think we note that I think we note the receipt of the report. I'm not going to note a report and no one's here to. I'm sorry. So can I at least have a show of hands noting we've received the report?
To speak, but it's not. Thank you.
Okay, Colette.
Thank you. I just wanted to make a comment about the item for community safety and criminal justice budget, and I'm delighted to see that violence against women and girls features in that. You know, not delighted, but I think it's important that it reflected in there. And I'm wondering whether the work that's needed to sustain that is actually looking at taking the message out perhaps to schools, because there is a growing level of misogyny among young men, and I think we need to start thinking about why that is, and also about how we can remedy that. But thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll come to that item in a moment. I was just clarifying that we'd received the report on this particular item. Ron, do you want to speak on the receipt of the report?
Yes, please. Sorry, yes, please. Could I speak to the community safety and criminal justice budget on item 3? I must admit, partly my fault, I have been trying to chase the problem with the barristers in the criminal justice system. Presently, the juniors are presently on strike, and the effects on the justice system. I just thought I'd report to. I intend, as neither the deputy or the police commissioner are here, I intend to write to David asking to let me have implications, or would you like me to put it through yourselves and so therefore the whole committee get it?
I'm very happy for you to email and CC the whole panel in.
I'll email Carly.
Yes, please.
CC Carly.
Yes, if you would. As I've said, let's not run through a report where we haven't got anyone to answer that report. Let's just accept that we've received it. It was unanimous that everyone's received it. It might be the only unanimous vote of the day. So let's agree that. I'm appreciative of the comments there, Ron. Yes, if you do have any questions, they can go direct to Carly, or they can be CC'd in to either the panel, to myself and Carly. But either way, do feel free to send them in, and we can get some responses so that we're not playing catch up next time and having to deal with 4 months rather than just 2. So, okay, Carly, we've agreed that we've received the report. We're now going to move over to item 4, the Police and Crime Panel update from the Council's representative, and that's with you, Rena Ranger.
That is with me, Chair. The panel have not met since the last meeting of this panel, so there is nothing to report. The next meeting of the Police and Crime Panel will be on the 17th of November at 6 p.m. in County Hall. So I'll report back after that one.
Thank you very much. Colette, this was the item that you were referring to, was it?
Yes, it was. It was in conjunction actually with item 3 as well, Chairman. I have nothing further to add.
Excellent segue there. Thank you very much. It's an interesting one. I'm not sure whether there's an increase in misogyny or an increase in awareness and recognition of the fact that certain behaviour is like that and reporting of it. And I think that it's a good thing that people are more aware and that we're looking to step down on it. That's a personal view. Colette?
I'm not about demonising all men or young boys and their behaviours. Please don't think that's a blanket approach, but I do think there are trends that we need to be aware of, as I said earlier, and we should be doing what we can.
Yeah, look, it's about trends. It's about education as well, isn't it? And as you say, the last thing you do is stigmatise and demonise, because that just brings out the keyboard warriors and haters even more. Let's take people on the journey, make them understand why, in just a whole variety of areas. So there are no recommendations. There's been a very brief verbal update on the report, so we just accept that that's what it is, and we move over to item 5. I can promise you that. Oh, hello. Who's requesting? Sorry, John. Yes, John, you're requesting on my screen here. Sorry.
Just a quick question for Rena. I thought the panel was supposed to meet in September, and I saw the other day the meeting had been cancelled. Do you know why the meeting was cancelled?
I think it may be due to business or how much there is, but no, at present, the next one will be on the 17th of November.
Cancelled by?
I can't say at this time.
Is it the chairman?
Could be.
I tell you what's very useful, just for future reference. If a meeting is postponed, rescheduled or cancelled, find out who and why. Because what we just don't want to find is that there are no, I'm sure there are very good valid reasons, and John just wanted to know, like the rest of us, what they were. But the way that the schedules for our meetings particularly work is very useful if we've got something to report back to. What we've not had this morning is either the Police Commissioner's Office or the Crime Panel. It's obviously some members will be a little bit frustrated.
My understanding is it's been cancelled due to lack of business, but either way, the next meeting would have been on the 15th of this month, and we're meeting on the 7th, so I would still not have been able to report at this panel because I would have gone to the meeting next week.
Okay. Business. Okay, we'll look into it. Thank you very much indeed. We're now going to move over to item 5. There is, believe it or not, the whole of the agenda is not going to be as quick as this. I warn you now. It's going to slow down now. Okay, so now response to the motion of antisocial behaviour in Hertfordshire. I think we've got John Bolter, Head of Business Development, Governance and Finance. We have other officers here as well who I would introduce. But I think before doing that, because this is a motion that came from council, it would be probably appropriate to invite Sally Symington, who is subbed on to today's meeting and who spoke at the meeting, just to give us a brief outline for a couple of minutes before I ask officers to report and then for us to have a general discussion. So Sally, it's with you.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. And first of all, just like to thank officers for the report that's been provided. I think it's really interesting following that actually when we come to talk about what's in the report, that we can reflect on the item before that we haven't been able to discuss because the police and crime and the deputy police and crime commissioners are not here, but that they have actually picked out antisocial behaviour as an item that they're going to focus on, which I welcome. Actually, what's produced in this report appears to evidence that there's been a decline in it, in antisocial behaviour, as defined by quite extensive list of actions which constitute antisocial behaviour in Appendix A. If you'll just indulge me a little bit, Chair, I just would like to explain why this motion came about and the background to it, because I think it will help contextualise where the discussion goes. So in my division, in Tring Division, and my neighbouring division, Berkhamsted, where I'm a borough councillor, so I have quite a good oversight of both these areas, I'm going to confine this quite specifically to teenage antisocial behaviour. And there has been a noticeable uplift and certainly a level of reporting anecdotally, even if people are not reporting online. Sorry, I don't know if I'm at the right distance from this microphone. It seems to echo off me. Of teenage antisocial behaviour, which obviously impacts on residents, elderly, of all age groups, but particularly the elderly community feel very threatened by it, even though the behaviour in itself may not be in and of itself detrimental to, it's threatening, but it's not causing physical harm, is what I should say. And this has come to me in a variety of ways. So first of all, I was approached by the youth services department team at Herts County Council to ask if I would release some Section 106 monies to fund some outreach work that they were going to do in the community. So first of all, I can evidence that I've personally been asked as a county councillor to fund work in the community to deal with this antisocial behaviour. Within the community, we've had meetings that have involved the school, the local secondary school, the PCSOs. The PCSOs have been very involved in this, which we welcome, but clearly it takes their time. So to suggest that it isn't taking up public time, public money, it is. And they have fed back to us that what they're seeing is that teenage children who've been in lockdown for more than 2 years, therefore not being able to socialise or attend school in the way that they would have done, now that they're able to be out and about again, this has affected their behaviour and the sort of lack of discipline, I guess, and structure around their lives has caused some of them to exhibit behaviours that are antisocial to others. So I see this very much as a function of, post-COVID or coming out of COVID, because I don't think we're post-COVID situation. And as I said, specifically, I've taken my own division, but I happen to know that it's similarly in Berkhamsted, the trends are exactly the same. And when I've spoken to other colleagues within our Liberal Democrat group, other people are reporting the same things. So basically, that's the background. I know it's quite specific to one group of people, but I think it could be extrapolated to equally to domestic abuse, which I think has, again, not necessarily reported, but it anecdotally that, there have been issues around that as well. As I said, I won't go through this whole list because there's quite a comprehensive list on here that constitutes it, but I'm taking an overview of things. I just wanted to also to mention, whilst I'm speaking, that obviously the report refers very much to reporting. Now, when we in the community have asked people, have you reported this to the police on 101, the standard response is, you can't get through on the telephone, it takes 45 minutes. And that the website, and I've tried this myself because people have said it's difficult. It is very, very difficult to report it online, not because you can't access it online. It's just that it leads you down a whole load of channels. That doesn't necessarily mean it's reported in the right way. So I just flag up that I don't know that the figures that are presented in this report, I'm obviously they're the statistics. I drove over listening to More is Less. Do I mean More is Less? Anyway, you know what I mean, the Tim Harford programme, which challenges statistics. And I think, we need to look at these statistics very carefully. Why was there a big drop off between 2017 and 2018, a flat lining and then a further drop? Are we counting the right things? Are we counting the same things? So I take the statistics at face value. Thank you for providing them. Anecdotally, they don't fit with what I'm hearing on the ground. And longer term, what I'd like to know is, I think we should be looking at this in a holistic way. What are we doing for the community to help people so that they know and understand how we're responding collectively as a county council, as the police, with other stakeholders to deal with this problem. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Sally. I'm going to invite actually Simon Toohill in a moment to talk us through this. I do have some concerns about this. And I think we may want to tease out some information and we may want to tease out some answers. And I would ask Sally specifically and others not to be offended if in doing so we may question each other or etc. because we want to have a proper debate on this. Because when I'm hearing words like anecdotally versus numbers that we actually have, when I'm hearing you use phrase like I'm giving an overview and then using words like specific instances, it's slightly at odds here. So let's see if we can drill down into some of the facts, because it is important that where there is antisocial behaviour, it's dealt with. But I also think that as elected members that we have responsibility outside of here to ensure that we don't do anything that may look as though we are potentially scaremongering, and that we make sure we've got our facts right about what is really happening, while at the same time recognising there may be issues in certain areas. So as I say, I just want to balance it. I don't want anyone to be offended, but I do want to see what we can get by way of some facts following your very useful presentation. Simon, over to you.
Chair, it's actually John Bolter.
Right, John Bolter. Sorry, I'm one ahead here. John, Head of Business Development, Governance and Finance. I apologise, John.
So ahead of your time, Chair, as ever. Okay. So yeah, thank you. Good morning, panel. Thank you, Chair. So Sally's done a brilliant job of introducing the report, so I'm not going to dwell on it too much longer, particularly when beside me is Michael Nadazdi from the County Community Safety Unit, who is very much our subject matter expert in pulling together the data. And Michael's probably much better qualified to comment on how the data is pulled together, where it comes from, and perhaps just touch very briefly, Michael, on the local structures that are in place to address antisocial behaviour and other community safety issues in the locality. So if you don't mind, Chair, with your permission, I'll hand over to Michael.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Sally. It's one of the challenges we have as a county-wide authority is that ASB is by definition very much a local problem and is dealt with using local structures. It's not typically something that we would get involved in the day-to-day with. So when initially asked about the question, the instinctive thing to do is to look at the data. And of course, we use the strategic assessment data, as explained in the report, which is police and crime data, but some data from other partners, to look at all crime across Hertfordshire, and that is how we respond strategically to this, to all offence types. And there is a challenge with underreporting, and there's a challenge with underreporting across all crime. You mentioned domestic abuse, which is very, very separate from ASB, although many reports of ASB are driven by domestic abuse incidents. We know that chronically underreporting is a problem, and I think there's also an understanding that there are challenges with the 101 system in terms of people getting through it and reporting. But what we do make clear as much as we can to public, to anyone, is that reporting is absolutely crucial in terms of how we tackle crime and disorder. It helps us just determine where the challenges are, what the challenges are, and how we allocate the resources to deal with those challenges. So yeah, the data that we have, that's sort of the best we've got. But what we do have in terms of ASB specifically are, as John referred to, the local structures that are in place. And what we have are multi-agency groups, which some members may have experience of. It's at a local level. Partnerships are comprising of police, councils, housing associations, health, fire and rescue, probation, etc., who look at both the strategic assessment data that we provide, plus their local intelligence products, the sort of thing that you would refer to, Councillor Symington, around the anecdotal data, that information, what we are seeing on the ground is different from that sort of thing. And they look at it as emerging risk and determine what the best way of tackling it is. I have spoken to the CSP as a result in sort of preparation to understand how they are, what they are seeing, what they're seeing. So they were talking about the memorial gardens as a particular sort of a hotspot, as it were, at the moment. And it was one of the things that was unusual is that the coming out of COVID, the not post, but coming out of COVID response to ASB. What I think we're seeing, the sort of reports of ASB that's on, it's just teenage ASB. It's nothing that's we don't see over the years, and it fluctuates. And of course, it's particularly in school holidays and the fine weather we've had. There's nothing. There's a common saying in community safety. There's nothing stops ASB like the rain, and we haven't had any rain. And they're out and they're enjoying themselves, and a minority can cause problems. But there's also perception issues. Young people just in a group can looks like ASB to some people. So the Community Safety Partnership will look at that issue and will determine whether it needs a response. Now, they've been looking at training, and decorum is a very, very large area, and it hasn't at this stage turned up as an emerging risk, as something that is reaching levels where that justify moving resource away from priorities in other areas of decorum, which had perhaps more significant levels of antisocial behaviour. But that's not to say it can't be. And I've been invited to invite yourself to meet with the community safety manager at the Borough Council, the Safe Neighbourhood Team Sergeant there, Sarah Anderson, and obviously the local member, Julia Baker, is the community safety portfolio holder for the Borough Council, and to raise these issues and understand that mechanism so that any further issues can be filtered in there, and they can actually be, in that case, quite agile in responding to those issues. But the key message is somewhat frustrating. If it's not reported, we cannot do anything about it. We can't do anything about something we're not told about. I think that's it. Unless there's any questions, or if I missed anything, please do.
Thanks, Mike. I'm just going to take some comments, and then I'll make some more comments. As I said, I just want to tease a few things out here, so that we can all be happy moving forward. I've got Rena Ranger next.
Thank you, Chair. I have some sympathy with what Councillor Symington is saying, the perception of crime. Because we are elected members, we get a lot of people coming to us with their stories and anecdotes. And part of our responsibility, I feel, is also to filter sometimes back that, for example, in my ward, we have a community WhatsApp group. It's a fantastic resource, but unfortunately, it also means that for a period of time, last year or the year before, almost 200 people were putting their crime stories on one WhatsApp chat, which was unsettling me to a great level, as well as many residents. And it is only once you start, as Councillor Bright says, teasing out some of the information. This bin does not say Hertfordshire or any district in Hertfordshire, but has a London Borough's branding. This is not happening here. Or we even had burglaries and people attributing local road names to them. And if you're not councillors who are knocking on doors every year, you don't know that that is not in fact that road. So it was up to us to say, this is not here, this is somewhere else. And having to try to tease out what is really happening with what people feel or perceive may be happening because of social media and a lot of these groups, and people talk to each other and the stories sometimes change. I feel that I completely agree that things need to be reported, and I encourage residents to, if not want to report it on 101. I reported a suspicious vehicle on an online chat, which was all very pleasant and very simple, and there was no rabbit holes of anywhere. We have at district level, especially in Three Rivers, local area forums where we always have a representative for the police. And if residents are unable to come themselves, it may be that they speak through their residents association and have somebody come and represent what is happening in the local field. Or we have the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner to come and have their open forums. So there are a number of ways of reporting things, and many of the PCSOs are contactable on their numbers, or at the bottom of their signatures email. But there are lots of other initiatives that may put some residents or residents associations at ease, like Walk with a Cop, which is happening in our ward. I just wanted to also bring up two things before I sign off. Is we have scrutiny panels, and the forum that I will be going into at November. Some of the functions are to ask questions for anybody, any member of the public, and they are meant to roam around, and I would encourage people to put that through their local communities. But I completely understand that there is a disconnect between all the various stakeholders who look into crime, tackle crime, fund some of the mitigations, whether that's street lighting or whatever else may be needed. And I do not believe that there is a place where residents associations, councillors, officers, the Police and Crime Commissioner, local police all meet at once. There are levels at officer levels and councillor levels, and I was put forward a motion in Three Rivers that there should be open meetings in that forum, because we will have them for highways liaison and discuss where the potholes are, but it may be that there is a dark alleyway there, or somebody perceives an area to be a dangerous hotspot that needs some kind of mitigation measure. But as we all know in this chamber, land ownership is quite complicated. Who is responsible for what is even more so, and to have everybody in a room to say, I believe this is a problem, whose responsibility is it, where are the funding streams, who are the stakeholders, maybe an easier way to also engender some sense of community security. But it was also chaired, the scrutiny panels also play a large part in making sure that we are doing what we should be doing, and the Police and Crime Commissioner should also be looking into what we would like him to look into, as well as what they do on normal business.
Thank you very much indeed for that. I've got quite a few people who want to speak. I'm actually going to call Sally to speak last, because you started and finished. I think that would be useful. Can I just say something before we move on? So decorum last year, 3,511 reported cases of antisocial behaviour. That is 300 a month. That is 10 a day. It is highly probable that some of those 10 a day are the ones that are being reported. And yet overall, the figures for the year are still down, which is something to be welcomed. What I'm trying to do here is not to say in any shape or form that Sally is wrong in what she's saying to us, because there will be some dovetailing, some confluence, some conflation, some of it coming together. And still that's far, far too many than we would like. But I think there is a way of saying, these are the figures, we've got local issues. Yes, they're coming down, but we have specific problems. And I think it's about how you address that so that people, when they're in a public meeting, a council meeting, and when it gets out there, it doesn't look as though somehow we're saying no, that it's everything has gone to hell on a handcart, or that our officers are wrong. There's a way of accepting that it's coming down, but in certain areas it isn't. As I say, it's 10 a day. Some of them may well be the ones that Sally's hearing about. So I just want you to think about that before, while other people are speaking. Colette was next. Colette Whitelow.
Thank you. I recognise a lot of what Rena was saying, and also listened very carefully to Sally's comments. I think one of the ways forward that we can help take this forward is by ensuring that there is a much closer liaison between county, borough, police, and that way you then cover more area, you support each other. I'm very fortunate, I've got a new community police officer, and we had a ward walk only last week. And I have a particular community within my borough and council division and county council division, which the youngsters there do cause a lot of the antisocial behaviour. But as they grow up, we have a lull. The figures drop down, and then we have a new crop which reaches the age where they are out there. That it's an endemic problem, and despite our best efforts, we can't totally deal with it. There is a lot more liaison, I believe, in my division than in many others, and it depends on the quality of how prepared people are to collaborate. So, for example, my new community police officer is shaping up very well. The last one was fine. I'm sure his expertise lay in other areas, and it's fostering those relationships. It's also, as county councillors, getting that message across that you keep on reporting on 101, even though it is frustrating. I have to say, the feedback I've had about 101 is not that residents are waiting forever or can't get through, but they sometimes perceive there is a lack of response even when they do get through. And again, if you've got people like me being made aware of that, then I can say to the police commissioner when I see him, or to Jeff Scott down at the Coram Borough Council, this is what happens, Jeff. Jeff, can we have a little influence in the background there to make sure that my residents do get the support they need. My community police officer is also starting to do old-fashioned policing, which is walking round the beat as well as driving round. And I heartily applaud his efforts, and he knows that I've got his back. I'll be supporting him, and together, working together, and I'm fortunate I'm a borough and a county council, as I've said, we can get that coverage. And I think it's more about those kind of initiatives that we should be pursuing. And I appreciate why Sally raised it. I'm not at all sure that we haven't already seen through the figures that, in fact, there has been quite a concerted response to ASB. And I also see that it's reflected again, as we said in item 3, where ASB is part of that, part of the budgets for the forthcoming year. Thank you.
Thank you, Colette. What will also be interesting, of course, we don't have the figures yet for 2022. And what we do know is the last couple of years with lockdown, the figures have gone down, but would they surely not have gone down anyways? Do we have anything yet, any indication, Michael? I know there's other speakers, but at this stage of any sort of trajectory of where you think we're going with this year?
Only what was in the report I gathered, because I thought that might be the issue, because the latest data was only at 2020. So I took the first 6 months of 2022.
For those of us who are watching at home, can you just explain what that is?
So at 4.6 on the report for the panel, recorded ASB incidents in the first 6 months, comparing 2017 to 2022, and the first 6 months of 2022 have seen the lowest ASB in that 7-year period.
Okay,
so
I suspect it might pick up a bit over the very hot summer we had.
That took us up to the end of June. So we'd have missed a little bit. But again, all this data is collected on an ongoing basis, and will be in next year's strategic assessment and the ongoing monthly, daily, weekly assessments made by police and partners at local level.
Thank you. For those of you who are saying, actually, the biggest rise in antisocial behaviour has been in Hartfordshire. Let me just reassure you with my other hat on, that's due to the behaviour of certain people in council meetings. That's purely what it is at Hartfordshire. That's why there's such a big raise. And I'll move swiftly on. Thank you. Can I take, Julie knows what I'm talking about. Can I move on to John Hale?
Thank you, Chair. I think this has been a very useful discussion so far. For one thing, it has outlined in a slightly disorganised manner everything that is happening and everything that can be done. And there's one other thing I would add on to the list that has been being generated, which is, and I'm not sure it has been mentioned by anybody, which is ECHO. The police's, I think it's also called Rant and Rave. But ECHO, which is what I'm advising my residents to use, because it's more generic than 101, and it allows you to say, I'm worried about X in this area. And it has had some impact through our police priority setting forums and with the PCSOs, etc., in seeing that resources is developed, directed to the way it is. I agree with you, Chair, that we should not be scaremongering. But what I think we should be doing is highlighting what is being done about what is an issue. And I know it's, and picking up on what Colette has also pointed out, this is one of the 3 themes that the PCC has felt was important enough to include in his community safety and criminal justice budget as a priority theme. So I think even the Police and Crime Commissioner, and if he had been here, was one of the things I was going to ask him about, was why he'd put ASB into this theory. So I think this is something that we're probably doing a lot about it. We're not perhaps being as good as we could be at telling the public what they can do and what we are, and what the counties, the districts and the police are doing. And I think it would be useful perhaps if the community safety unit could come back maybe in 6 months' time, I'm not saying at the next meeting, but at a later meeting, and give us a presentation on how how the community safety unit works, how it interacts with the police and the boroughs, what its role is, and give us some further information. Because there does seem to be a lot of initiatives going around. I would like to just raise one disagreement with some of the speakers, because I think there has to a certain extent been a tendency to talk about it as being a problem with teenagers. And a lot of antisocial behaviour is responsibility of all age groups. I can think of one elderly gentleman in my division who has been a problem in the past, and he is older than any member of in this room at the moment. So it does spread across all. And looking at the list in Appendix A of the report, there are things, and one of the things I know has been a particular issue in my division in the past is road racing, off-roads and motorcycling, which all falls under antisocial behaviour. And it's not teenagers doing it, it's 20, 30, 40, 50-year-olds, especially when it's horse riding. Those little carts that some members of the community occasionally like to race up the A414. So that's the point I want to make. But I think if we could have a presentation from the community safety unit later in the year, early next year, I think that would be very useful for helping us as members to get the message over to the public as to what their public services, the councils and the police, are actually doing about an issue that, as you said, is, you know, I think you said decorum, it's 10 instances a day reported. And as we know, reporting is an issue.
Thank you very much, Sean. A couple of things. First of all, yes, I'd be happy to have something in 6 months, because then we'll be able to have a look at the figures for 2022 in the whole, in the WHOLE. And secondly, John, can I just ask you a question? Sorry to probe, but you said the report was presented in a disorganised manner. I wrote the word disorganised. What did you mean by disorganised?
I didn't mean the report was presented in disorganised. I meant we in this meeting, because of the way the discussion has gone, we've had, you know, Rena has raised some very useful ways of getting things raised by talking to your PCS. I think she mentioned PCSO and priority setting forums. Colette's talked about working with her police officer. I've mentioned ECHO, other people have mentioned 101. And what I'm saying is it would actually be quite useful, I think, if we had something that said, if the public are concerned about something, these are the things that you can do. Report it using ECHO, report it on 101. And these are the things contact your local county councillor. And that was what I was saying, is there's been lots of good ideas, I think, or not good ideas, good information thrown out in this meeting, but it hasn't been it hasn't been tabulated.
Okay,
But the report is fine. The report's
Okay.
great.
Okay, John, but by the very nature of teasing out, you're going to get different views and different opinions, and that's why we have officers very kindly making minutes, taking minutes, and people like Michael will then see those minutes and allows us then to adapt. So I think this is very positive, but I hear what you're saying. Okay, next I've got, I'm taking Sunny Thusu next.
Thank you, Chair. I want to just comment on actually the motion itself, because first premise is saying that there's been an increase, but glad to see Welland Hatfield has had the most decrease. But then I come on to the question that you said about perception in teenagers, because if I was to go back to a number of my constituents and say, actually, it's actually gone down, I can guarantee you if there's 10 there, 9 would give me incidents of antisocial behaviour. And then you tease down into it, and it's young people playing football close to their house making a noise in the long summer nights. And you think, well, is that antisocial behaviour? They gather in a certain area, again, long nights, or because there's a light there, say at the skate park, they leave a lot of rubbish. Is that classified as antisocial behaviour? And it goes into responsibility. And we talked about teenagers, and we never talk about responsibility that their parents have. Occasionally, I do come back late from work on the train, 11 o'clock at night, and I am surprised to see 14, 15-year-old children outside the local McDonald's. Now, they're not causing any problem, but, and I can admit, sometimes you feel a bit sort of tense, or you think, oh, I don't know what these people are doing here. Turns out McDonald's has free Wi-Fi and they're using the Wi-Fi. So going back to the point making on the motion itself, it's just quite broad. The numbers are the numbers. If we go on what one's perception is, then you can't really do anything, because for every statistic that you say, well, that's not true because here's the statistics, you'll go, well, someone told me that this isn't true. And we get into this area of battling between what we think is happening and what they think is happening. I do agree, though, that it would be really good to have a concise library or some sort of information, say, if these are the issues, these are the 3 things we would like you to do. And you're right, there is a lot of things that happens. I sit on many panels and I'm writing down going, oh, I didn't know that you could do that, or that's something we could do. I do agree on that point. But coming back to the motion itself, the numbers don't seem to stack up. We talked about teenagers, and the other point I wanted to come is COVID seems to have been like a cutting block on almost everything. I think it's disingenuous to say young people suddenly, because they were locked in, have now become feral. I just don't think that's true. There's always the argument that should we be funding more community things, but judging on how much I'm giving out on locality budget for various community programs for young people to join football teams and rugby teams and various other things, it is something that I think motion itself is it's too broad. We can maybe narrow it down and be more specific. The numbers aren't there, and maybe that might change, but we show that we are doing a good job, but perhaps we could be more coordinated in how we can point out how things can be made better and reported. Thank you.
I think that's very interesting. It's very important. I don't think anyone's saying that lifting of lockdown caused people to be more feral. I think it's actually that lockdown itself may have artificially reduced the figures based on other years because of the amount of time that people were in their homes, like it did, for example, a crime fell quite considerably. Certain types of crime fell quite considerably. Sadly, some of the crimes, as we discover afterwards, like domestic violence, increased, but certainly burglary and things like that, because people weren't at home and so on. So, but I think you raised some very interesting points. And before I come back to Sally, I'm going to suggest what I think might have been a way to have got her message out there, but in a motion, but it wasn't quite as open-ended as we're suggesting. I'll come to that in a moment. Before that, I've got Peter Hebden online and then Ron Tyndall. Peter?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'd like to agree with John Hale, actually, first of all, with regards to the fact that antisocial behaviour is not the full responsibility of young people. I think we saw during lockdown, when all these fast food outlets were shut, the sort of the litter by the side of the road actually decreased, because you didn't have pizza boxes and Costa coffee cups and things like that lying by the side of the road. But when they opened, of course, you found all these remnants of takeaways by the side of the road thrown from cars. So it's not young teenagers, it's the older ones. And also, nobody's mentioned schools. In Hatfield, there's been a big decrease in antisocial behaviour. We've also had a big increase in attendance at schools and engagement by the parents at schools, and so that makes that does make a big difference, because obviously for those youngsters that are involved in antisocial behaviour, if they're not at school, they're going to be getting in bother, but if they're at school, they're not. The only other thing I'll say about the motion, when I read the motion, I just thought just very benign. I'm not sure what it was actually trying to achieve from the motion. It just seemed very, very vague and a bit woolly. So I was just a bit confused by that. That's all.
Thank you there, Peter, from Welland Hatfield, which, according to the figures, had the highest drop in antisocial behaviour of 13.8%, with or without pizza boxes. And good thing you weren't in Edinburgh last weekend. My goodness, you would have seen a few pizza boxes then. Thank you very much indeed for that, Peter. I've got Ron Tyndall and then Judy Billing, and then I'm going to come back to Sally to sum up before I do so. So let's take, who did I say? Ron.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, a couple of points. Thank you for the report, which is very strong on data and not much else, but I'll come back to that in a moment. Secondly, I do think one has to be careful of data, as other people have mentioned. I tend to concentrate on domestic abuse statistics these days, and certainly, and I recognise what the Chair said earlier about anecdotal evidence, but certainly everybody in the domestic abuse world knows that anecdotally there is far more domestic abuse than there is reporting of it. And these data figures only concern reports, not actual events. So I think we need to be careful about whether or not it's going down or going up, because the data just is about people who have reported it. There may be lots of it going on that isn't reported. But having said that, thank you for that. I'd also, my comments are going to be wide across the borough rather than have one borough across the borough. I would particularly like to concentrate on the last couple of lines of the motion, because it basically says, request a report outlining the actions and sources of funding available to tackle this by the three parts, the triumvirate of county, borough and police. Now, as I said, the report's very strong on data and not much else. So what is actually going on at borough level between those three bodies? Now, every district has a RAG and a JAG, Responsible Authorities Group and Joint Action Group. Now, do the county, or the county parts of the problem turn up at the RAG and the JAG? Or are they often not there? Because I know when I was involved in those bodies 10 years ago, when I was on the police authority, there were occasions where different elements that should be represented at the RAG weren't there. And that meant full open discussion could not take place. Now, secondly, and I know we said about the multi-agency groups, but who do they contain? Do you mean the RAGs? And as I say, are the copy. Secondly, the education. I think there was a news report a little while ago saying that because of COVID and the rest of it, the education system across the country has lost 90,000 young people. They've disappeared off the registers. Now, they could be part of the problem. Rather than, so what are the education department doing about all that? What are they doing about liaison with secondary schools? I'm concentrating on young people because I'm dealing with a particular problem, antisocial behaviour, which is not about kicking footballs. It's about young people, teenagers, throwing bricks against people's front doors and through people's windows. And that's a bit different. And the data doesn't show up. between what could be just be a kicking the ball around the field or whether or not it actually involves violence. So again, the data needs to be carefully analysed before we go about the fact it's reducing. I would argue that we need to concentrate on how the three elements, county, borough and the police, are working together to actually find solutions. They may be great at producing data, but what they then doing using the data for? That's the key point, and that's what this motion is getting to. Actions, behaviour, staffing. There's a whole range of issues there that should be put together within the existing structures that we have to do something about it, because that's what residents want. They find statistics, we all quote statistics, but residents want to know, what are we doing about it? And I'll leave it there.
Yes, Ron, I'm not going to have an argument with you today because the sun's shining still. When you get a complaint that a report is strong on data and not much else, I turn around to officers and say, thank you very much indeed, because if they brought forward a report that was strong on hearsay with no proof at all, you'd be saying, well, where's the data to support that? So, yeah, well done, officers, for bringing us forward a report that's strong on data. I hear what you're saying, Ron, but I think you're trying to play both sides of the bat there. I think anecdotal, as we know, is important. It's one of the roles that we have as county councillors, borough councillors, parish town councillors, district councillors. The eyes and ears of the community are our residents. They report it to us, and there has to be feeding down to make sure it's heard and dealt with. Get that completely. But when we're being told in a motion, and I'll come to Judy and then Sally in a minute, when the first line of a motion that went to council that would have been printed elsewhere may have gone to residents, that says, in light of recent reports of increases in antisocial behaviour, doesn't say where, gives no specifics, right? I'd rather have the data that says, well, hold on a minute, let's balance that out a bit, because you could say, a motion could have said and made the same point, while we welcome evidential decreases in antisocial behaviour overall in Hertfordshire, we ask the CSP, Community Safety Partnerships, to recognise specific increases as reported by members and ask the CSP and associated agencies to investigate anecdotal evidence to see how the alleged issues can be overcome. Now, that way, as a responsibly elected member, you're able to say, we accept what the evidence says, we're telling you there's other stuff here, and this is what we're asking you to do. Believe me, that is far more responsible than saying, oh, I'm not sure about this report, it's strong on data, not much else, because we're hearing things elsewhere. Because if we go outside to our communities with motions like this, well, anyone can read it anywhere in Hertfordshire and think that there's an increase in their area where there may not be, Ron.
If your wording or what you've just said is going to be your recommendations for taking this forward, then I'm happy to accept your wording, what you've just read out, as a way of progressing this.
I would remind you that the recommendation, I'm coming to you in a minute, Julie, the recommendation is we're asked to consider the motion, which is what we're doing. We're considering it. We don't have to come back with another one. All I'm saying is, and we don't have to accept the one that was there. We're considering it. We're having this discussion. All I'm just teasing out is, as I've said to you before, is a way of getting these messages across. It doesn't disrespect members, but at the same time is very wary that what we say gets out there in the public domain. And we have to be very wary about accidentally setting a fire where there doesn't need to be. Okay, I'm going to take Judy, then Sally, and I hope that was helpful to Sally before she sums up, to show that I'm being as positive as I can here. Judy, and then Sally to finish, because it's running on a bit now. Judy?
Thank you, Chair. And yes, I'm aware it's running on, so I will try not to witter. But I do actually think that both you and John are wrong to be focusing so strongly on the wording of this motion. The motion is not of all that much interest to me, but the subject actually is. And it's the subject I want to talk about, really, because right at the beginning of the pandemic, David Lloyd started having weekly meetings, and they were jolly useful, with all the executive members from the districts as well as the county across Hertfordshire to talk about what was happening. And much of that was about things like antisocial behaviour, and those meetings were very useful. I don't believe, as you don't, that young people have become more feral since the beginning of the pandemic, but we definitely do know that there have been huge increases in mental health problems. That's not the same as feral, but it does actually sometimes lead to issues of antisocial behaviour. So all the things that members have said this morning have been really useful, and I would like to see a mapping exercise. I'm sure the officers are taking note of everything, but a mapping exercise that brings all of this stuff together. We have RAGs and we have JAGs, and I should be at a RAG meeting this morning because I should declare that as Executive Member for Community Engagement in North Hertfordshire, this is very much part of my patch. But the issue is for me that perceptions are important, and practically every form of action that I get involved with really important meetings about antisocial behaviour in the Hitchin marketplace, with the police, with PCSOs, with local businesses, with officers of the county and the district. There is a missing ingredient, and the missing ingredient, and the one that's absolutely vital, is the public. And just before the pandemic, we were starting to go back to priority setting meetings in district locations, which included the public. And in my view, until we go back to those, we will not be able to take the public with us in discussing these issues and the difference between data and perception. And I said something very similar at a recent meeting to Lewis Cocking, who seems to have forgotten already that he's a county councillor, and he's gone all managerial on us. And I've told him to have a severe word with himself about that, because public perception over something like antisocial behaviour is absolutely vital. And if we ignore it, we do so at our peril. Now, one really positive thing I wanted to report was that I have written a specification for engagement with local schools over Local Democracy Week, which has stopped them saying, well, what do you leading members want to come and talk to our children for anyway? And it's made them very, very responsive. We've got a queue of schools wanting to engage with us. And if we can't weave in something to do with antisocial behaviour with those children while we're there, we will definitely be missing an opportunity. And they're the things I wanted to say. The final thing I wanted to say was that I wake up every single morning absolutely delighted not ever to be doing politics in Hertsmere. And I believe that that's a cross-party thing. I don't know what's the matter with you all, but I wish you'd stop it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I wake up every day sweating. But that may not have anything to do with politics. It could be an age thing. Can I just say, Judy, the subject is important, but I might have to remind you that we have to focus on the motion, because that's what we've been tasked to do by full council. And I think I've been as fair as possible, allowing as wide a discussion as possible to be able to tease things out. And I would say that I do think there should be another report in 6 months, which doesn't just give us the figures for the year, but actually drills down further into how those figures break down. Because I think there is a general view here that those figures will end up being more. It's more than just about numbers. It's about, well, how do those numbers break down? Is it just noise? I mean, I heard it last week, those electric hairdryers that kids are driving around at great speed that are making lots of noise. You know, is it that? Is it football? Is it etc. and so on? So we will be pushing for that. Sally, I'm going to ask you now, just to sum up. I hope you think we've given us a fair and open discussion.
Oh, so I'm fiddling with it. Yes, Chair. Thank you very much. I do feel like you've given it a very, very big forum and a plenty of time. So I'd like to thank you for that. And I obviously welcome that. I'd just like to start by saying, with reference to your first comments, I'm not in any way offended by what's going on in this discussion. I welcome it. But we haven't really met before, but I have a physics degree, so I'm very data driven, but I also have a master's in public policy. And part of the Masters in Public Policy educates us not obviously just on the quantitative, which I was really, really happy to do as a physicist, but also on qualitative. Oh, I'm being cut off at the keyword qualitative analysis. Now, I'm sure some of you know with your background, qualitative analysis isn't just anecdotal. It's actually about going out into the community and interviewing people and actually writing reports based on the words that people use and what they say. So you have to balance the quantitative with the qualitative when you're looking at things holistically. So I don't take offence at what you've said. What we've been given is a very quantitative report, which I welcome, but what's missing is the qualitative side of it. Nothing in my motion or what I've said is intended to criticise what's happened in my division or any other division. Actually, I welcome the interventions. And as I think I tried to convey when I was speaking earlier, it is through those interventions, people coming to me and asking me for support as a county councillor, whether that be the youth services team. I've actually had PCSOs come and ask me for funding for street lighting that highlights the issue. And so what I'm asking for is that all these things are brought together so that the community can understand that things are being put into it. I tell every resident that comes to me, whether it's to do with speeding or antisocial behaviour or any other issue, please report it. And they always say it's very difficult. And I say, if we don't have the evidence, we can't do it. And I've already explained, I am an evidence-based policymaker. So I fully support that and I encourage my residents to do it. One of the I really welcome this wider discussion. I think listening to some people, it highlighted to me that and reminded me that one of the feedbacks I had from the head of Tring School is that one of the aspects for, and I'm sorry to concentrate on young people, but it obviously is a wider issue, but for young people, and I think this differentiates us, say, from Watford, is that it's a very isolated area in Tring. There's not an awful lot going on. And I think it needs to be recognised, possibly that the issues are different in different areas. And so when I'm talking about a holistic approach, I'm asking that we think about the whole county, and that some areas young people don't have ready access, and certainly it's going to be even worse for them with travel costs and costs of everything, access to activities. Again, all the agencies I'm working with take this on board, but what we're asking for is that this is put together as a document for everybody. So yeah, I'm going to sum up now. You'll be pleased to hear, Chair. The report, and I think Ron mentioned this, the report asks for the actions and sources of fund. So the motion asks for the actions and sources of funding. If the first part of the sentence, and this is to go back to Judy saying the semantics are not quite right, it doesn't change the essence of what we're asking for, which, as I said, actions, what actions? It's really clear, listening to all my colleagues all around the chamber, there are loads of actions. What are they? Can we identify them to the public? And what are the sources of funding? There are sources of funding, as we know. As I said, I was asked for Section 106 money. There must be lots else going on. So what the motion is trying to achieve is to bring this together as a report. I welcome that you've said that a report can come back in 6 months. I'm just asking that it's expanded. This is in no way meant to be hysterical. This is meant to be a way of evidencing to residents that the County Council takes this issue seriously, has the actions in place, and what they're going to do and what the sources of funding is. The thing I'm saddest about is that neither the Police and Crime Commissioner nor his deputy are here to be part of this discussion, because, as already mentioned, it is one of their priorities. So I really hope that they catch this up on catch up or whatever that can be fed back to them, and that we can tie in with the work that they're doing and work together on this. So thank you.
Look, thank you, Sally. I think early on I indicated obviously that the panel would obviously like to have had at least one of them there, or maybe the chief executive, who often turns up on the police commissioner's behalf, and I will seek to have words with the police commissioner about that to ensure that we do have a representative here. I love all this qualitative, quantitative stuff. I think that's wonderful, and I've learned a lot today. I really do. I love drilling down into figures, but it's not about semantics. If the first line says, in light of recent reports of increases in antisocial behaviour, that's generic. And I think it just needs to be a little bit less generic and a little bit more specific, so that we don't worry people all over the place. And at the same time, we accept that there is good work being done, but at the same time, we've got to look at this as well, and that's why I made the suggestion. But I think overall, I'm really, really glad about this debate. We've had almost an hour, which I think we wouldn't have got this level of toing and froing in council. It might have been far more parochial, it might have been far more political, and I think we've managed to avoid all of that. So I'm very grateful. I think everyone who's on I think everyone has actually spoken on this item, so I'm really, really pleased. The recommendation is that the Cabinet panel are asked to consider the motion as set out in paragraph 2.1 of this report. And do we take a vote on that? But no, just a generic. Is everyone happy that we've done that? Just a few nods. Yes, everyone happy. Thank you very much. And as I say, thank you once again, Sally, for bringing that and for coming onto the committee today to be able to be part of it. I'm very grateful. We're now going to move over to, I told you it would take a bit longer. I said we were whisking through it too fast earlier on. We're now going to be moving over to item 6, electrical vehicle fire management. And I hope colleagues will not mind that, bearing in mind it has been, the last time we met was early July, and we've been through an extraordinarily hot summer. If I just invite from Herts Fire and Rescue Service, Simon Toohill, to say a few words before we move into the main body of the report. Simon.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, councillors. And thanks for the chance to just update panel around the unprecedented period we've just been through in fire and rescue. And I've got some stats here that I'm just going to use to illustrate that. So the number of calls that Hertfordshire Fire and Rescue Service attended in July and August 2021, so this period last year, we took 1,296 calls, 999 calls to fire control. That resulted in 953 emergency incidents and 162 fires. For the same period this year, we took 6,680 999 calls. We attended 3,495 incidents, of which 1,262 were fires. So a significant increase on where we would be usually. And just to maybe bring some of those stats to life, I'll talk about a few of the larger incidents we attended over the last couple of months. So on the 25th of July, we attended a 12 pump fire, 12 fire engines in London Road, St Albans, a commercial fire. On the 12th of August, there was a 10 pump fire in Balmoral Drive, Boreham Wood, a block of flats. On the 13th of August, the next day, there was a 12 pump fire in Tolpits Lane in Watford, which was a large grass and wildfire. And the next day after that, on the 14th of August, we attended a 10 pump grass fire off the Great Cambridge Road in Cheshunt, which was also a wildfire as well. In addition to that, there were 22 further incidents in this period where we needed more than 6 fire engines at any incident, including significant lorry fires on the M25 and other grass fires. So really just to update the panel, officers are immensely proud of the work that your fire and rescue service has put in over the last 2 months. The firefighters have gone above and beyond the call of duty. I've been visiting fire stations and passing on my thanks to them, but I thought it'd be useful for you to know how unprecedented the last 2 months has been.
I wanted you just to introduce this report. It was because, as I've said, I know I was in constant contact, weekends, all times of the day and night. The Balmoral Drive fire was just literally, when I say half a mile, it's just down the road from me. And thank God, 15 homes, flats, just, yeah, but thankfully no one was injured, which is a miracle. But imagine putting on all that kit and all that equipment and running into a fire when everyone's running the other way when it's 35, 40 degrees. And as you say, the figures speak for themselves. So I know the council will want to say this, but on behalf of the Community Safety Panel, which is meeting first, can I offer our thanks? Can you pass on our best wishes to all our staff and crew who are on all the shouts, because they did us proud and they did the people of Hertfordshire proud as well. So I just wanted to say that at the beginning of this report. Thank you very much indeed for that. I'm going to move over now to Andy Hopcroft, who's the Deputy Chief Fire Officer, to bring this report, and as you can see, provides an overview of the fire at Potters Bar bus depot on the 22nd of May, and it outlines the considerations and approach to managing electric vehicle fires as this technology grows to meet decarbonisation commitments. And this is obviously very much in the face of a lot of Facebook postings which you get at the time of people thinking, why did these things happen? What's happened? Is it the end of the world? And so on. So it's just useful to have an update. So it's Andy, when you're ready. Oh, sorry, Simon, you're presenting, are you?
Yes,
Simon's
Chair.
presenting this one as well. Go on then, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Hopcroft is away on annual leave, sunning himself in warmer climes at the moment, so I'm presenting this paper. Thank you for the introduction. This is a paper that describes an incident that feels like a lifetime ago, given what we've just talked about in terms of the last couple of months. The incident occurred on the 22nd of May at the bus garage in Potters Bar. The first call came in at around about 2:30 to a bus alight, and subsequently Hertfordshire Fire and Rescue Service had 8 fire engines in attendance. In the end, 6 buses were destroyed by fire, 4 of which were conventional diesel fueled and 2 of which were electric powered. It was a significantly high profile incident. We took 73 calls to our 999 call centre, very visible because it's right in the centre of Potters Bar. The bus garage is owned and operated by Petrol, and they provide services into London for TfL. As a result of that, Hertfordshire Fire and Rescue Service carry out full fire investigation. So we had officers there for several days working with colleagues from Metroline and the bus manufacturers. The cause of the fire has eventually been attributed to overheating of the lithium-ion batteries in the one of the buses, which was most likely due to one of the staff members making an error when they put the bus on charge. The report also details then not just about the incident, but then the subsequent post-incident considerations that Hertfordshire Fire and Rescue Service have around electric vehicles in Hertfordshire. And so Section 3 makes recommendations, and these have been compiled with assistance of colleagues across other directorates, including Environment and Infrastructure. Those recommendations are largely that whilst the fire was concerning, the number of fires in EV, electric vehicles, is relatively small. It's still new technology. It's something that a lot of research is still going on around. And our commitment in Hertfordshire Fire and Rescue Service is that we'll be part of that research. And so just to bring that to life, the National Fire Chiefs Council, which is the NFCC, the overarching body that looks after fire and rescue services, has set up a statement of need to do some research in conjunction with the Home Office. So that will be funded for next financial year. The NFCC are also working, because this is not obviously a Hertfordshire issue, it's not even a UK issue. Electric vehicles are now prominent across the whole world. So the NFCC are working with the Fire and Rescue Service in New South Wales on a project called the Safety of Alternative and Renewable Energy Technologies. And so that's taking place in Australia, but the technology over there is broadly the same as here. And so they will be carrying out controlled burns and looking about how the batteries interact with each other and how best to extinguish them. So there is a lot of work happening with this new technology to help us understand how it behaves in fires. So that's a real summary of the report. I'm of course happy to take questions from councillors.
Thank you very much indeed. It was very interesting because it didn't get raised, because we had a full council a few days later, and I was really expecting to receive a question about it. And if I realised I hadn't been, I would have said something about it, because it was quite extraordinary that the 2 electric buses were surrounded by petrol, diesel, whatever it is they use, buses. So I think it was 8 of them, wasn't it? Up in it was either 6 or 8 that went up. And of course, people were sending me footage of it, because people literally living could see it over where they were living. It was quite extraordinary, the stuff that came through, and again, an extraordinary response. But we need to focus on the fact that it was two of them. And you've given a very interesting breakdown. There are those people who are concerned about electric buses and so on, and electric battery-driven cars. So it is important that this report comes forward. Sonny and then Ron. Sonny? How's that?
Yeah, thank you, Simon. And again, thank you to the fire services for their work during the summer. I've got a couple of questions, actually three. With regards to the electric bus fire, you seem to indicate that actually there's an element of human error in this. Are you saying that as a consequence, if the person had followed proper protocols, there was unlikely to have been the fire? Second, have you looked at whether in the future, because there seems to indicate that there is spontaneous fires, but whether they're battery or not battery doesn't indicate, whether buses should be sheltered versus non-sheltered, i.e. if in more direct sun makes a prop issue, or is it just a general heat that if they are sheltered, it'll be even more hot? And last question was, I'll be honest with you, I had never heard of a petrol car spontaneously catching fire before this report, I'll be honest. And it seems that 5.7 indicates that Ford cars seem to be more on that. What is the incident rate of spontaneous non-battery cars? And is there a difference between a large vehicle and a small vehicle?
Okay, thank you, Councillor. So I'll try and do those in order. So I think that the first question was around if the staff at the bus garage had followed the protocol, would there not have been a fire? Obviously, some of this is supposition, but that is likely to have been the case. Lithium-ion batteries are very safe indeed. The main cause of the fire and the spontaneous runaway thermal reaction tends to be when they're subject to either incorrect handling or perhaps a physical or thermal shock. So, which is why airlines are so concerned about them being in the baggage hold of aeroplanes. So if the protocol had been followed in this particular instance, it's probably like there wouldn't have been a fire. I kind of touched on the answer to number two, which is in terms of the spontaneous bit. It's a runaway thermal reaction as a result of an intervention. So there's that the electrical powered. So it doesn't just happen. It's a result of an intervention. So as I said, they're very, very safe. And then the third one, you ask about cases of petrol cars spontaneously catching fire. Well, no, that doesn't happen either, but we do go to lots of fires involving petrol and diesel vehicles. Petrol won't spontaneously combust, but if there is a fault within the internal combustion system or the fuel delivery system, it can result in a very inflammable liquid being placed onto a very hot surface in a vehicle, which would then combust.
I could ask. Just going back to my yearly fire safety course that I have to do in the NHS, there's that triangle with regards to the fire. So with lithium-ion batteries or any fires, just having heat coming to something makes it, you actually have a combustible element. There has to be a spark or something to make that three things occur. So as a rule, it's actually quite rare for all of these things to happen unless all three elements are there. Okay, thank you.
And it's worth just talking about some of the emerging technologies in terms of extinguishing electric vehicle fires. So colleagues will probably be very familiar with fire blankets that we use to put out, or people can use to put out fires in oil chip pans, because actually the last thing you want to do is put water on them. And so those smaller domestic blankets, you lay them over, and the principle of extinguishment is the reduction in the oxygen, the triangle of fire. So some fire and rescue services and the NFCC are now looking at large blankets that you would lay over the top of a vehicle fire, an electric vehicle fire, but then suppresses it by reducing the oxygen that can get to it. So the early stages, we're still starting to trial that. Clearly, that wouldn't be possible for a bus because it's too big. But for electric vehicle car fires, there is a potential way of extinguishing.
I love all this. You see, this is what I like about this panel. I love all this detail. It's fantastic. Because at the moment, if I'm right, it takes about 40,000 litres of water to cool down a battery in a car, one of the electric cars, before you could do anything about it. Is that about right?
Yes. So the way we put them out at the moment is largely the same as we'd put out any other fire, which is with copious amounts of water. But with that type of lithium-ion fire, it takes a lot more water.
So we're talking about environmentally friendly batteries, 40,000 litres of water. Thankfully, it doesn't happen too often. I love the detail. I'm going to take people in order. Oh, now we're getting lots of people coming up now. I've got Ron next, Ron Tyndall. Lots of data in this one.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Simon, given your statement about human error and incorrect handling, would it be correct to say that overall, from all the available evidence, electric vehicles are still far safer than driving around with a bomb on board, as you do with petrol and diesel?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. I do think that because petrol and diesel internal combustion engines have been around for so long, people tend to ignore the fact that they are driving around a vehicle with a container full of inflammable liquid in the back of their car, and we accept that as normal. Fires in EV vehicles are still so incredibly rare, and the numbers of those vehicles are still incredibly rare. It's very hard to understand what that's going to be like in 20, 30 years time. But as a broad analogy, I would agree that they are still very safe.
Thank you very much indeed. Quote of the day from Ron Tyndall, always is Ron Tyndall, driving around with a bomb on board. Next meeting, it will be a cigar tube full of highly inflammable fluids in the air. Thank you for that, Ron. Next, we move over to Rena.
Sorry, just a complete tangent on the chip fat fires, because many people are now air frying. So by the same logic, is the fire blanket the best thing to do for phone batteries or any other kind of lithium batteries? Is that what we should be doing? Repurposing our fire blankets, not for the chip fat, but for other battery fires?
Yes, that would work. I with the standard caveat, of course, which is if there is a fire, the first thing you should do is get out and ring 999. Please, yeah, do not put yourself at risk.
Going back to the other motion we were discussing, a part of our role as elected members is to disseminate this kind of information out, and some of us put out lots of leaflets, so maybe some column inches could be spared for this kind of information too.
Yes, or we could do a cross-party leaflet on good news. Moving very. Oh no, that's set Ron off now. I'll let you back in, Ron, quickly before I go somewhere else.
Very quickly, having had experience in another job about use of fire blankets, it's important to site the fire blanket away from the potential seat of the fire, because if it's over the potential seat of the fire, when it goes up, you can't reach the fire blanket in order to put the fire out.
You see, I love this panel. Okay, next I've got Colette and then Sally.
I hope the answer to this one is going to be yes. I was reflecting on Sonny's comments about how you protect the public and so on, and I do wonder whether risk assessments have been undertaken particularly with regard to double-decker buses, and if there is a fire on them, either from a petrol or diesel. It would be diesel, of course, or electric. Do we have procedures for evacuating people in those passengers in those circumstances? Because, of course, the great thing about what happened, not that it was a great thing to happen, in Potter's Bar, there were no people involved. There was nobody on the buses, nobody around the buses. It could have been much worse. Thank you.
Yes, I suppose the very easy question to that is yes, there will be. The risk assessments won't be carried out by Hertfordshire Fire and Rescue Service. They'll be carried out by the owner of those vehicles. But absolutely, yes.
Excuse me, Chairman.
Yes.
You did say will be. Does that mean there are none at the moment? Oh,
yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Colette. Thank you, Simon. Sally.
Oh, thank you, Chair. Yes. Thank you, Simon, for your report. I think I'm just following up on what everyone else has already asked. Colette's just asked about the risk assessment. I would really welcome. I appreciate you can't do it yourselves, but presumably you can put pressure on the company to do that and be clear about their procedures to mitigate these risks. My question is, and it may be that something you can't answer, but if you treat electric vehicle fires differently from petrol fires, whether actually these buses should be stored separately.
Thank you, Councillor. So I'm going to bring in my colleague in a second. So sitting next to me is Tony Smith. He's the Hertfordshire Fire and Rescue Service lead for fire protection. So he'll be able to do some of the bits around legislation. The first part of your point was around mitigation of risk by working with owners. And Tony probably will be able to talk about that, because he'll be able to talk about the legislation we have, but then the close work we will do with Metro Line and or any bus company in terms of working with them into what, how their bus garage is laid out.
Thank you. Yeah, so that's the piece of work that sort of happens after such an event, where my department in particular starts to work with the responsible person, i.e. the owner of the bus or the owner of the bus garage in this case. Thankfully, and more often than not, actually they're very proactive, because this isn't something that they wanted to happen, certainly not, and that we're given the profile of the event as well. So, and you heard Simon allude to the fact that the manufacturer of those vehicles was brought just to participate in the investigation. So, yeah, we usually, and certainly in this case, pushing against an open door, and so we're looking at those sorts of things, separation of parked vehicles. Those sorts of things. There's some new guidance that's out now around charging of vehicles and placement of vehicle charging points and things. So we're sort of catching up a bit, if I'm honest, but we are catching up quickly.
Thank you, Tony. And I think it's fair to say, and the paper stresses that because this is such new technology, we are learning about it all the time. And it might just be worth me just updating colleagues around lithium-ion batteries in non-vehicles. So what the young people, the hoverboards that young people have, the little scooters, the electric bikes, they all contain lithium-ion batteries as well. And there has been some concern from the Fire and Rescue Service around how the regulatory framework around those items, because unlike cars and buses, they don't tend to have a strong regulatory framework, and they may be imports. So they have caused some significant fires, not least because people put them on charge and will leave them in the hallway of their flats, or perhaps even worse, in the stairwell of a communal block of flats. From a fire service extinguishment point of view, as we've said, the way to deal with them is relatively straightforward. We will put lots of water on and put them out. But actually, I think there's work that will happen with members of the public looking at that prevention piece around being very careful about leaving items on charge for extended periods of time and where you put them. And then further work around the sort of the prevention and regulatory working with trading standards colleagues around making sure that cheap imports aren't, causing problems, not just in Hertfordshire, but across the whole country.
Good. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, I'll take one more. Go on.
Just in view of to disseminate proper information, can you confirm that hybrid cars that have both petrol and electrical components are just as safe as any others, not doubling the risk or anything like that?
Yes, there's no evidence to suggest that the hybrid vehicles that have an internal combustion engine and batteries are any more dangerous than any other type of vehicle.
I think what's important as we move to a conclusion on this, what's important is for us to know that when there has been an incident, what was the cause of the incident, so that people don't start worrying, because we do see news pieces about electric scooters that have set in their homes that have gone off, etc. So we need to understand what specifically caused it. Why did it spread? It spread because there were 6 buses like cheek by jowl next to each other, and the one with the battery set the petrol ones off. So we need to understand that also, and the emerging technology, and that it's not just being taken for granted, it's taken as again very, very seriously. So I think that's why it was important to bring this report. The recommendations, which I do need to read out, so give me a moment to do so, because then I will need to take a vote. The members are asked to approve the approach taken by Hertfordshire County Council and Hertfordshire Fire and Rescue Service in relation to electric vehicle fires, namely 1, to continue to adopt and accelerate local electric bus programmes. Does that make them faster, the buses? To follow both government and National Fire Chiefs Council guidance on electric vehicles and review any potential impact on projects should the national position change. Locally, to continue to consider lessons learnt from electrical vehicles fire incidents and work with partners to introduce new measures, advice, training and guidance. We've had that reassurance. To continue to monitor and respond to international, national and regional research into EV technology and fire management. To provide public assurance and safety advice for our residents with electric vehicles. That's very important. Better comms, good comms, more comms. Share our insights and learnings with government as they develop new policy guidance and legislation. I hope you'll agree that we've had that conversation, we've taken those points forward, and that we're all in support. But I need to go and take is it a named vote? No. So can I just have a show of hands, please? Everywhere, I'm getting a show of hands. Everyone in the chamber. I've got Stella, Peter, I've got Peter, have I got Judy? And I've got Judy's hand as well. So thank you very much indeed for that and for your contribution. Simon, that was excellent. Thank you for your contributions. We've dealt with two major items. We had two more items. I'm just going to therefore take a 5-minute comfort break for those who need it, and we will reconvene in 5 minutes' time. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, colleagues, welcome back to part 2 of the Public Health and Community Safety Cabinet panel. We have 2 more items before we conclude business for today. And the first one is item 7, the Prevent Update Report. And this is with Sophie Lawrence, our Prevent Programme Manager. Over to you, Sophie.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, indeed. I'm bringing this paper on behalf of Alex Woodman. And the purpose of this report is essentially as a result of several significant conversations about how we want to improve the governance of Prevent. We've decided that we would like this panel to take over scrutiny and oversight of the policy, the delivery and communications around how we abide by our Prevent duty, essentially. So this will be a biannual report to this panel, meaning twice a year, to look at our programme and delivery of how we work in the Prevent sphere. So this paper essentially, just to update those on the current stance on the Prevent agenda from central government. So ultimately, as a local authority, we have a statutory duty, and that statutory duty means we must stop people becoming terrorists and supporting terrorism. And this sits under the Counter-Terrorism and Security Act 2015. And just to say this up front, all districts and borough councils also have that statutory duty as well. So the objectives of the Prevent agenda, they are tackling the causes of radicalisation, safeguarding and supporting those most at risk of radicalisation, and finally, those who've already engaged in terrorist or extremist activity, supporting them to disengage and rehabilitate into the society. I thought it was interesting earlier at the start, actually, that we had I believe it was Colette who mentioned about the growing misogyny amongst men. Just think it's important to let this panel know that Prevent is a very complex area. Terrorism and extremism is a very complex area, and we are aware of growing trends and there being a line that may be crossed where such topics such as misogyny, falling into extreme misogyny. Is my microphone all right? Yeah. And that line about, some of you may have heard of the involuntary celibate movement, which essentially sees pockets of men with a shared grievance of their suffering around what they perceive as success with women, becoming, developing into an online subculture of extreme misogyny, and some of those even smaller pockets endorsing and carrying out violence against women. And I think it's important that although there are set Prevent objectives from central government, it's down to us locally how we respond to those changes in trends. I can certainly say from a Hertfordshire perspective, we do a lot of work with partners to update them on those growing trends, from education all the way through to things like the fire service. So the paper then moves on at 4.3 into how Prevent is governed in a 2-tier authority, which is very different to a unitary authority. So we run the Multi-Agency Prevent Board. This is chaired by Alex Woodman, the Executive Director and Chief Fire Officer for Community Protection. And this is basically where we set out our strategic objectives for Hertfordshire. This board ultimately looks after our channel panel, which we run monthly, where we discuss our cases of people in Hertfordshire vulnerable to radicalisation. And then the multi-agency Prevent Board feeds into this panel now, and also the contest panel, which is headed by ACC Matt Nichols. I mentioned before that district borough councils also have a duty, the prevent duty. So ultimately it's up to them as individual organisations to decide how they want to carry out their prevent duty. But since this post was made, my post as Prevent Programme Manager, the work we've put into the multi-agency Prevent Board has allowed all 10 district borough councils to come together, share best practice, and basically achieve some, well, quite a significant level of consistency across the county when we look at our prevent delivery in Hertfordshire. The paper continues on to our current threat level in the UK, which currently sits at substantial, which means a terrorist attack is likely, and continues to just make reference to the fact that in Hertfordshire, and this was actually corroborated only yesterday with an update from counter-terrorism policing, the referrals that we receive around prevent come from a wide range of partners, and that is off the back of continued and increasing engagement with a multitude of statutory and non-statutory organisations, NHS, police service, counter-terrorism policing themselves, education is a huge one as well. And we are starting to see, slowly but surely, a pickup in engagement from members of the public and even more so in our community groups. Important to note that we have, of course, in Hertfordshire, which was covered in local media, had 2 terrorism arrests in March and June this year. Both continue to be under investigation and being well managed, and all partners that are required to be involved are heavily involved, and ensuring that that process is running smoothly. And the paper also just mentions just a handful of some of the projects that we are doing in Hertfordshire. We've been incredibly busy. Some of the ones that I would like to just pull out are the work we are doing with the fire and rescue service. So joining Hertfordshire, we started looking at some of the gaps where maybe awareness wasn't where we wanted it to be. And we put a lot of work into a selection of partners, and we thought fire and rescue are a major partner in all safeguarding agendas. So one of the projects we're doing at the moment is to train face-to-face every single crew member on every single watch. It's a long-term project, but off the back of that, after 2 years of, as far as I'm aware, no information coming forward from the fire service of relevance to prevent, I think we're now at our 6th piece in 2 months. So the engagement really has shown that that conversation is open, that dialogue is open, and that confidence is growing in this very complex area. Just moving on to 7.1, thought it important to let this panel know that the Home Office has launched an assessment process into how local authorities deliver on the prevent agenda. So we received our first Home Office assessment, and ultimately we scored very well, and we're very happy with how we scored. And this is being complemented by a visit from a senior member of the prevent agenda in the Home Office himself, coming to Hertfordshire later this month. So we are being highlighted as an area of good practice, and as the government looks at how they want to continue delivering prevent across the country, I think it's important to note that Hertfordshire is involved in that conversation, and we will be involved later this month when we do get that visit, looking at how we can support sharing the positive work that we are doing in this county. So I think I'll leave it there. Hopefully that's summed up that paper enough, and I will be happy to take any questions from any of you.
You say that now, but you might not be in a minute. Thank you, Sophie. Ron.
Thank you, Sophie. Excellent report and lots of information to digest. I'd like to hone in on involvement for young people, because I think, to be perfectly honest, if we are trying to, I'm a great believer, if we're trying to prevent something, then we need to get into children preferably as early as possible, but certainly it's secondary school level. And in sort of there's a couple of bullet points on page 39 where you talk most recently over 100 attendees getting into schools, and I just wondered that what's the percentage of coverage yet in our secondary schools, and how, you know, are we likely to be able to roll the programme out completely in a reasonable time? And the other one is about the recruitment for the Eastern Region Counter-Terrorism Youth Advisory Group. Do we have a similar Hertfordshire one, and how are these people selected?
Very good questions. Thank you very much. What I will say firstly about young people and engagement with young people, schools also fall under this prevent duty, and we've done a lot of work to support schools in achieving that. As we all know, schools have a lot going on at the moment, lots of different safeguarding agendas going through the COVID period, and as a county we want to make sure we're providing what we can to not only achieve consistency and achieve high quality work, but also just generally we know that the more support we give, the more quality we will see. So I actually just this morning got a figure that we're looking at since rolling out the DSL trainings, we're just under 600 have attended over the last couple of years. So that's 600 online. And personally, I think in person, we're looking at between 250 and 300 more. So the amount of staff we are hitting is a lot. We're starting to roll into now students and talking to students, whether that's through form time, PSHE, assemblies. I've certainly got a few assemblies lined up. And it's both when talking to staff and to students, that's where we're offering opportunities like the Counter-Terrorism Youth Advisory Group. That's at its very early stages, but purely through going across schools and speaking face to face, there is an appetite, and it will be a very competitive process to get into the Eastern Region group. So I think there's a need to have a Hertfordshire centric group as well, where we can get our Hearts young people together to help basically craft the future of counter-terrorism, which looks wildly different now than what it did 10 years ago, mostly because of the online and social media space. Other areas to focus on next include private schools and higher education, further education. We do have a regional coordinator who looks at that from a prevent perspective, but I think it's where we want to, especially on debates about free speech and speakers coming in and venues getting hired out, we want to make sure that we've safeguarded all of those areas and that free speech is respected. So in terms of percentage of coverage, I don't have an exact figure, but we are at a point where we've covered so much, it will now be much simpler to look at those gaps and start targeting our work in those areas with those schools and face to face with those staff. So so far a big success, more to do, but it's getting done.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm just looking to see, yes, I do. I've got Sally and then Sunny. Sally?
Yeah, thanks, Sophie. Great report. I don't know if you're going to be able to answer my question, and I hadn't forewarned you of it. So if you can't, I'm happy to take an answer some other time. But yeah, great report. Just wondered, what is the budget that you're operating under?
Great question. There is no budget. We are a unfunded Home Office area. So in short, the Home Office will look at areas that are considered higher risk, and then we'll fund them via the Home Office. So we're an unfunded area, so we don't actually get any money for that. There are new initiatives coming out to support that, so we will look at engaging with that. But at the moment, we're not technically working with a prevent specific budget.
So,
Yeah, no.
can you just explain where you are being paid from?
Well,
You're not doing it for love.
No, not entirely voluntary. No. So Home Office funded areas they have prevent coordinators and education officers and community engagement officers, all funded by the Home Office. So I am funded by the County Council, but that as a role, that is not accompanied with a budget to work with for any projects. Does that make sense? Sorry if that wasn't crystal clear.
Head of Business, Governance and Finance? hold on, just wait for the mic to come on.
So yeah, sorry, thank you, Chair. Just to supplement that, yes. So Sophie's post came through as a growth item in the County Council budget 2 years ago, or that marked the start of your. How long have you been in post now? Okay, so April 2020. With the new prevent commitments came in, and funding was found from the authority to support that role, but there is no additional budget beyond her salary.
Yeah, thank you. So is there anything that this panel or the County Council can do to help you to get funding that you think that you might need?
Yes, I think as more work is done by the Home Office, ultimately, I think what they've realised is that, yes, the system where particular areas are funded is potentially maybe outdated now, and there's evidence that terrorism and extremism obviously happens in unfunded areas. So those initiatives to provide money are coming forward for those unfunded areas. I think we'll bring any approach or any way we want to tap into that via this panel and get some thoughts and acceptance from here and ultimately support. And that's probably the best way to approach that. And I think with your support, looking at both external and maybe other options for funding, I think this is the network to sit within to look at those. So we'll bring those approaches here and work with you on that. So if that works for you, and I appreciate your potential support on that.
One more, go on.
Thank you. I think that perhaps defer to the chair as to what's acceptable. So just my other comment would be obviously the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner would be an obvious place to source funding. So I'm sure you're working with him.
Thanks.
Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, possibly. Yeah, we've all got, yeah, okay. John? Hold on, you go wait for mics so people.
Thank you. Just to state the obvious perhaps, but it may well be for that very reason that the Home Office are taking such an interest in Hertfordshire in how much they have achieved with essentially so little funding, and all the more compliment to Sophie and the collaborative work that goes on in the county, which seems to impress them, that they want to do some digging to see how they can make the most of the good practice going on in the county.
Well, you see, they don't have a Sophie Lawrence, do they? You may have had one in EastEnders 20 years ago, but that was a different person entirely. We've got Sophie Lawrence here. Sonny.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, again, I kind of mentioned it with the fire and safety. In the NHS, you have to do a yearly prevent module. And if you don't do it within, I believe, 6 weeks, you can't actually come to work. And as a consequence, I believe the NHS has close to 95% prevent module compliance. Whether that prevents terrorism or not, I think it's more to identify rather than anything else. Which brings me back to point 6.1, where we only have 72% in the council. Is that I assume that it is part of mandatory training that they do the prevent, and 72% implies obviously there's people not doing it for whatever reason, they haven't got time, it's been missed. Any thoughts of bringing that up? And just a point, you say that you're in an unfunded area because you are believed to be low risk. When I worked in the East End, I know that they were heavily funded. And I believe that was a bit of an archaic thing, because I think originally they were thinking on terrorism in terms of Middle Eastern recruitment. But as you've mentioned, and what you read now more in papers, it's very online and it is very widespread. I'd like to know what our definition of terrorism now is. You know, some people might well say that if you go into the House of Commons and glue yourself to the Speaker's chair as an act of terrorism. I mean, I don't think it is, but you can. But there's a wide variety, as you said. There are lots of disenfranchised young boys who are online and coming across misogynistic things. There's a gentleman called something Tate. I can't remember his name on TikTok. Honestly, I mean, if you listen to what he said, it's just despicable how he talks about women, how he talks about various things, yet he has over 2 billion views. is that something that Prevent looks at and says, actually, this is unacceptable? So, yeah, those are the main two questions.
Thank you. Yeah, no, thank you very much. Firstly, I think just to comment on the NHS element, there's a high completion rate in the NHS. Funnily enough, whether that translates into referrals is a different story. So we have an NHS representative on the multi-agency Prevent board, and we will be looking at trying to almost offer out some of the key services, that next level of Prevent awareness. So we've already done some with GPs, we did some with sexual health clinic, and we'll look to continue to roll that out, because although yes, an e-learning module is so much better than nothing, doesn't offer that opportunity for question and answer. So we'll be looking to increase that. In terms of the HCC iLearn module, what I will say is we did a big internal comms push. And I think, don't quote me on this, but I think we were somewhere around the late 50% when I joined. And we're now, I think, third highest out of the mandatory modules. So we've had a big increase, and I think we will be looking at obviously how to increase it even further. But we've come a really long way, and I think the comms works, small big things from like 60 seconds with Sophie Lawrence on the intranet, anything to boost that awareness is showing in further engagement and increased engagement. So 72 is very good for us, and we will absolutely look to push that even further. In terms of unfunded areas and the East End, yes, absolutely, the terrorism landscape is so different to what it was back in the day, so different. And I would argue that there is an online element in the large majority of the cases that come to us. The definition of terrorism, off the top of my head, is looking at threat or taking action to intimidate the public, influence the government, and it has to be for a political, religious, racial, or ideological motive. It can be interpreted in different ways, and we saw that. We've obviously had a lot going on in the last couple of years with Ukraine, COVID, conspiracy theories, and people love to rip this definition apart and apply it to their agenda. But we absolutely look at everything and anything that can be a threat to the public, and we take it very seriously. Just like you might say, as you mentioned before, influencers online who have the potential to incite hatred and violence, that absolutely is something that Prevent would consider to come under that agenda if it fits those definitions that sit with our world. So hopefully that answers your questions.
Thank you for that. So Andrew Tate, a former professional kickboxer who frequently made misogynistic comments about women online, has been barred in the last week, this is from last week, from Facebook, YouTube and TikTok after concerns about his influence on millions of followers escalated. And I think that's what the point of it is. It's got to be policed by the owners of these companies that are making lots of money, and we have to not liaise individually, but we have to make sure that where there are complaints, they are followed up so that they are part of this process as well. It can't just be down to an individual. Thank you very much indeed for raising that. Just to let you know that my son, my 12-year-old, took off the TikTok app off my phone. He said, Dad, he said, I don't want you to accidentally do a video and put it out there. It'd be really embarrassing. So I don't have it now. I don't know why he think I would do that. Thank you very much indeed for that, Sonny. This is really useful. Rena, you wanted the last point you wanted to?
It was just around the module and the take up with the training, and I was wondering if it was perhaps if you had any feedback on the module. The one I did for my role at local government was a bit onerous in terms of I haven't written an essay for a very long time, and then when I finally got round to it, it didn't save, and then it kicked me out, and it was all very stressful. But I don't know if there is any feedback you may want to crowdsource about the module and if there are any different options available in the marketplace. And the other thing, it springs to mind back to our earlier conversation about encouraging members of our community to report what they see and not tell each other or rely on anecdotal evidence. If you say it, if you see it, you should report it. And I think the sad fact is many of us will have heard news reports or seen instances where there were many missed opportunities or dots were not joined up, and we are part of a large dot that needs to join a lot of other dots up. So it is in any, whether it is antisocial behaviour, whether it's online fraud, whether it's all sorts of different things, we have to encourage our residents to report via the multiple means that there are available. And if needed, as I tried in my motion at Three Rivers, to create a new method to allow people to speak to the people that they need to say what they do, so that we don't have dots missed.
A motion, did you say? District Council.
District Council, as we were talking about it in the antisocial behaviour in the motion debate, it was about bringing all the different stakeholders and organisation, whether it's residents associations, like an open forum for county councillors, for district councillors, for police and crime commission, for local police, whoever wants to come to this local forum to have a joined up approach to issues on safety and areas of concern. So we can see what funding pots are available, who owns the land, whose responsibility it is. And also maybe residents have noticed something together that they haven't communicated to someone or somewhere. But because I think in the rags and mags that you were talking about, that's not an open form available to members of the public. It's generally elected officials and officers.
And was it passed, this motion? Excellent.
Waiting to see how what progress is made. Now.
That's what I like to see. That's what I like to see. People working together cross party. This is good. Well done. Thank you very much indeed for that. Okay, colleagues. As Sophie indicates, this is a biannual report. It's twice a year, as opposed to biennial, which is once every 2 years. So we will get another report in 6 months' time. I think it's been actually quite enlightening today to hear some of what we have, particularly around funding and also the challenges that are being faced. And there are a lot of challenges. What you don't want to do is overburden young people. They've got quite enough of things frightening them as it is at the moment, but at the same time, you have to make sure they know about these things. It's a bit of a wire you have to cross. So Sophie, thank you very much indeed to you and your team. The recommendations are purely that we note the content of the report, in which case, are we happy to do so, colleagues? Yes, and just general assent. I'm getting general assent. Yes, I've got general assent across the patch. Yes, that's unanimous. Thank you very much indeed. So our final report, because I always like to finish on something that's really cheerful, that lifts the spirits of the panel. So we now have a report on COVID-19 and monkeypox update. And as you've heard, Jim is not with us, but I'm very glad that our Head of Health Protection, Geraldine Bruce, will be presenting instead. Over to you, Geraldine.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, members. My laptop is not too healthy today, so I shall be asking Robert if he can kindly share some slides. And in true style, I should be saying next slide, please, as we go along. So this is your regular update that I believe Jim McManus usually brings, starting with the current situation with COVID. So our current position, based on UK HSA evidence and their advice and the advice of our Chief Medical Officer and NHS England, they've recently recommended to ministers that the COVID alert level moves from level 3 to level 2. So level 2 is actually a good level, and it's probably the lowest we will go now. This is reviewed regularly and will be reviewed again in the winter months. Due to our vaccination programme, which has been hugely successful, national figures are falling rapidly. If they were sitting at around 40,000 at the time of writing this report. Deaths too are falling from COVID-19. Hospitalisations are falling. Therefore, the prevalence of COVID at this time is considered relatively low. In light of this, government have removed the remaining domestic restrictions in England, and on the 31st of August, asymptomatic testing was paused in all settings. So for context, some settings such as care homes, special schools, and other areas, prisons, for example, those that weren't displaying symptoms, staff and residents had to have a test using a lateral flow device twice a week. Due to the prevalence being so low, they've paused that. And I think the key word there is pause. As I say, with all of this data and the position we're currently in, this will be monitored very closely as we go into the winter months. And if prevalence should increase, then they may bring that testing back in. The public health messaging around COVID remains the same as it has been over the summer months. Our main messaging is around getting vaccinated, and I'll cover the booster programme in subsequent slides. I can't emphasise enough the importance of washing your hands regularly, and we're running lots of campaigns with our schools and other settings, care homes, around how to do effective hand hygiene. The catch it, kill it, bin it slogan that's been around, we'll be relaunching that through our corporate comms this winter. Avoiding others if you're unwell. Of course, in the absence of testing, asymptomatic testing, there's a level of self-responsibility. So it's, if you are feeling unwell, you don't know if it's a cold or it's COVID, that advice still remains, just to be careful on who you go and visit and what you're doing, while balancing with actually living with COVID and getting our lives back, of course. Letting fresh air in wherever possible, meeting outside wherever possible. And face masks haven't gone completely, they are still a personal choice. So we're just supporting small businesses in other areas to allow people to consider wearing a face covering in a crowded space, should they wish to do so. Some data here. So we are just coming down the downward side of our last wave of COVID that actually peaked around the middle of July. As you can see, the second wave on this chart compared to the previous wave that we saw in March, April time is significantly smaller. Now, I think we have to be careful with data. Again, as I said, back in March and April, we would have had testing, so the reported cases would show higher. But generally, when speaking to UKHSA colleagues, this wave was considered smaller than previous waves, and again, attributing that to the positive effect of vaccination. So our COVID autumn booster strategy, that has launched now at the beginning of September. It's called a bivalent vaccine. So the vaccine contains what's called the wild type. I'd rather call it the original COVID-19 strains that we saw, but it'll also incorporate the newer strains that we see. So the BA.4, the BA.5 Omicron variants. So very good vaccination. There's a very ambitious programme, and like I say, it's already started. The priority for Hertfordshire, or nationally, the priority is for care homes and frontline health and social care staff. So they are being prioritised in these first few weeks of the programme. The programme will then roll down to the eligible cohorts. It's considered a business as usual model now this winter. So it's a slightly different approach to in previous winters. Some of you that aren't automatically eligible through NHS criteria, you'll remember everybody was offered a vaccination initially. So it was a mass population vaccination programme. It's different now. So we've got that mass population vaccinated. We're moving to targeted groups, very similar to a flu jab, for example. So we're doing people that are considered most at risk. So not everybody's going to be vaccinated this time around. It'll be those that fall into the eligibility criteria, and people will be called up when it's their time by their GP. Oh, that's it for COVID. I'm skipping on to monkeypox. Should I stop, Chair, at this stage and take questions, or carry on?
Then we'll come back. Yeah, carry on.
Yeah. Okay. So monkeypox has been our other main concern in public health of recent months. The first cases were identified back in May, and I believe Jim had already brought to this panel a presentation previously, so I won't explain the epidemiology and the history behind monkeypox. I can tell you where we are, though. A high proportion of cases in England have been in our London residents. That's 70% of all cases. The main gender is amongst men, so 98.7% of cases have been in men, and the median age for cases has been 36 years. Next slide, please. Or some pictures here. Sorry, we can skip this one. This is just to remind you, as the cases have gone on, the symptoms haven't changed, the presentation hasn't changed, and the severity hasn't changed. So it's very reassuring that it's not become more severe the more cases we've had. We can skip that slide, apologies. So how's monkeypox spreading? It's primarily spreading amongst a subgroup of our population. So that's our gay, bisexual, or men who have sex with men community. And it has contained within that community, which is a good thing. It's not spread out into other subgroups. And as a result, we're seeing cases now dropping. So cases are no longer going up, they're receding. The main way it's been spread is through sexual contact or very close contact, sharing of linens and towels, for example. And unlike COVID, it's not airborne. It doesn't spread as easily. It's very different disease. There have been no reported deaths in the UK, which is very, very good, and very small numbers globally have sadly passed. There is some morbidity associated to the disease. So we have seen locally people being admitted maybe for one day, a 24-hour admission, and that would be for pain control. So there is some pain associated to the rash. Next slide, please. So numbers and trajectory are very promising for monkeypox. As I said, cases are starting to fall. At the time of writing this report, Hertfordshire had 36 confirmed cases. On average, we're seeing maybe 1 or 2 a week, but we expect that to slow. There's an overall decline in cases, which suggests the infections are reducing in the community. This slide just has some data on, and like I say, we can circulate these slides after panel, and I can take questions through Carly once you've had a good look at them. But you can see the downward trajectory here. So cases are dropping, and it's showing that they will continue to drop. We do have a vaccination strategy for monkeypox, which is very good. This is being held and led centrally. So unlike COVID vaccinations, it's not a mass population approach where local authorities are given stock and free rein, if you like, to set up programs. This is very much being led by UKHSA, and it's being delivered through our sexual health services. So as I mentioned, the main subgroup that this condition is affecting is our gay, bisexual and men who have sex with men community. And they're very well linked in with sexual health services already, very health conscientious. And very likely to come forward. So they're very linked in, and they're receiving the vaccination on a waiting list approach through those clinics. I recently attended a Pride event, Hearts Pride event, and it was very positive. Lots of feedback at that event from the men were actually that they'd either had the vaccination already or that they knew that they were on a waiting list and were happy to wait to be called. There's not huge amounts of vaccinations, so it is done on a priority basis. So it will be the most high risk men that are called first, and then again, it will work its way down through the subgroups. We've already administered nationally 33,000 doses of the vaccination. Most of those were pre-exposure, so not to people that had already been exposed to the virus, but as a preventative vaccination. We've also vaccinated over 1,000 healthcare workers, so there'll be workers that are working in sexual health clinics and hospitals that would be caring for people who are unwell with monkeypox. We expect to have another large-scale delivery in coming months, and Public Health is working very, very closely with UKHSA and, as I say, our sexual health services. So that's the end of the slides. I think overall, as a recap, we are in a positive position at the moment, I would say, with both COVID and monkeypox. But I am acutely aware we're coming into the winter months. So this is a breather for us, but I think we'll be very busy in the winter. And happy to take any questions.
Very much. Thank you very much indeed, Geraldine. Very helpful. Good to know. 36 cases, thankfully, only 36 cases of monkeypox, no deaths. I know that at council we were discussing getting this type of information. I know that Julie asked me, Julie Binning asked me questions about making sure we got this type of information. It's very reassuring to have this type of information. And I'm very grateful for it. I've got a couple of questions, people wish, or comments. Colette was first.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for that report. It's very interesting, and I'm not sure whether you're going to be able to answer the question that came up in my head. Monkeypox, this outbreak is primarily within a particular group. And I'm glad to see that we are targeting and to ensure that the vaccination does take place within that group. But as an aside thought, if you like, many, when I was much younger, we had the HIV/AIDS epidemic again, which it was primarily affecting a particular group. And I just wondered, why does it happen within those groups? You may not be able to go into that detail here, but given that there might be link in that, is this being researched so that we can forward plan and protect this particular demographic from other things that might occur? And I say, I appreciate it might not be within your area or ability to answer, but I'd be intrigued and interested in your response.
Thank you. I can't speak on behalf of UKHSA, but I will on this occasion. There is all sorts of ongoing research going on into this, and that very question that you asked. I think it's too early to provide any data, but it's something that could come back in subsequent reports. They are globally trying to find the links and the cause of how this started. Of course, it's endemic in West Africa. There is some suggestion that there were some pride events, particularly in Gran Canaria, which is very close to that area, and some sexual contact would have occurred, which would have started it off, and then the subsequent domino effect of people flying back to their respective countries, because of course this isn't just the UK, it's worldwide, and there's people from all over different countries that were linked potentially to that one event. But it's a large scale piece of research, a global piece of research, and to be able to pin back to that first case, patient zero, if you like, will be quite a big challenge. But I think there'll be subsequent reports to follow.
In fairness, I'm not quite sure that was the question, and I don't think you can answer. I think it's about the epidemiology of what causes it to be. It's more up Sonny's area, really, if you know what I mean. I mean, him being the NHS, so I'm not expecting you to have that level of detail. Sonny, you were next anyway, so you might know a bit more about this than most of us.
Being a surgeon, I believe I know everything, but I don't know anything about this. I'll be honest, I don't know. In fact, I'd love to find out. I have read a few things in the BMJ about it. What I would say is the BMJ had a very interesting article, and they said, you're right, there was some sort of equivalence that they made with AIDS. But also people forget that, yes, it was among the gay, homosexual community, but it actually had crossed into the heterosexual community. And it was about 20% of deaths were from that. The reason monkeypox hasn't is because we're more accepting now of alternate lifestyles. So people aren't, back in the days in the 80s, people were probably closet homosexuals and were going out and practicing sexual behavior, then bringing it back to their home and then spreading it among the heterosexuals. But now monkeypox, we're a much more accepting society, and as a consequence, it hasn't made that huge jump across to heterosexual. That's the only thing I can tell, and that just means that I spoke but didn't actually answer your question. I wanted to ask you a few questions, if I could, with regards to COVID vaccine. I understand the people that work in healthcare, including adult social care, either the company or the hospital will sort out them, and everyone else was going to get contact from their GP. Now, in the last, I know there was a whole national one, but just before the national one was finishing, they were going back to more GPs or pharmacies. Some GP practices said, look, we don't have the capacity to do it, and so they were provided alternatives. Is that still going to be the case? Are some GP practices going to say, look, we can kind of give the flu, but to give them both together is a bit difficult and we can't? In which case, if that is true, how do those people get the vaccine? And also those people who are not registered with GPs, for whatever reason, homelessness, choice, if they want to have the vaccine, how would they get it in Hertfordshire? And my other question is, I know winter is coming, so flu is going to be probably more in the forefront of the NHS in terms of admissions of patients. Is it anticipated that COVID would follow, or more likely Omicron will follow the same pattern as flu, and so we would expect more hospital admission?
Thank you. I may just need you to repeat the second question. I managed to get the first one down. So with regards to access, this is something we very closely monitor. We're very closely linked in with our PCNs. And of course, there's an opt-in and an opt-out option. We are in a better position than last year. We have more GPs opted in. And I think we've learnt from last year and we've built on that. So we've ensured that we've got a robust delivery model. So in conjunction to GPs, we've got a lot more pharmacists actually that are on board this year, so we can direct people to pharmacists. Pharmacists are also very keen to work with us to do outreach and pop-up clinics. So we have a dedicated inequalities cell that sits under us, and I chair that cell, and we make sure that we watch the uptake rates very closely. And if we notice areas that are dropping or struggling, if we find it's because a PCN has opted out, then we'll plug that gap by doing pop-up clinics with pharmacists, or our community provider will offer a clinic as well. So we're very vigilant to make sure that nobody gets left behind and everybody has equal access. Hopefully that answers that question.
So supplemental to that first question then, if we are contacted by someone who, say, hasn't been offered it for whatever reason, the GP's opted on that, how can we direct them to the right place? Will there be like some sort of website that they go to?
Thank you. There is an NHS COVID vaccination website. I don't know the address, but I can certainly share it with members and for it to be shared with constituents. It is on our website as well, and you can go on there and you can find out where exactly you can get your vaccination. It doesn't just list GPs, it will list any of the pop-up clinics, any of the pharmacists in Hertfordshire. So it's quite useful.
And then with regards to the second question I was asking you, now winter's coming. It's anticipated that flu, which has been kind of dormant the last 2 winters because of lockdown and safety measures, is now going to possibly cause more admissions to hospital. Is it the opinion of yourself as an expert in the general public health community that Omicron admissions would also go up, or do you anticipate that the two are not linked?
Thank you very much. I would suggest that COVID and flu would not be linked directly. I think both in their own right will cause an increase in hospital admissions this winter, and we see that every winter. Certainly the last few winters, as you allude to, we've seen less deaths and hospitalisations due to flu, and that could be because of some of the measures we had in place, the face coverings, etc. So we're working very hard to protect our most vulnerable in our community. So our priority is to make sure that the flu jab is a priority over COVID. So the COVID will run as a BAU national programme, but we do lots of work to ensure that flu vaccines are given in care homes as a priority, as example. And we are maintaining lots of things that have been taken away in the public domain in our most vulnerable settings. So as an example, mask wearing is still a priority and a must in all care homes, and that includes visitors as well. So we're confident actually that the flu being brought in to these settings will be reduced again this winter.
Thank you very much. I got the feeling you were doing a little bit of research here, if rather than asking questions for the council, but that's fine. I can tell you that the thing about flu jabs is that what we always thought that they've only got efficacy of about 65%. We always thought it was much more than that, whereas the efficacy of the COVID vaccines tends to be about 80%, 85%, in some cases up to 90%. We know that the COVID jabs will more than likely have 2 different doses within them of the mixture they've got now, and it has been stated that you can now have left arm, right arm, same day, but for the flu and for COVID. But the reality is that even if you wanted to do that, it's going to be very difficult to do that, because it tends to be that the doctors are going to give out the flu and the pop-ups are going to give out and the other place are going to give out COVID, because they can't all do it all at the same time. It'd be ideal if they could. So there's going to be a mixture of things going on here. And I just think that it's good that they've started early, because, yeah, we're going to get a lot of people catching one or the other, thinking they've got one or the other, and the better we can be. I think the particularly those who've had the boosters during the year, they are now sort of waning in their ability to protect. So it's going to be important that we get people out there as quickly as we can. So Rena, I think you were next.
Thank you. Just a couple of questions. It occurs to me with the 2 items on this report, there's no more over there, over here situation in the global connected world we live in. Things spread, and I just want to find out, I'm sure there must be best practice coming from different places, and are we, just like the batteries, are we always taking whatever we can and then disseminating that to our residents? And following on from that is, we're not testing for COVID anymore. It's not being picked up on some of the lateral flows, which are probably very much out of date now. What is the advice to people, as we've heard, flu will come back at this winter period. COVID still has a lot of breathing difficulties and issues like that for people. What is the advice when to seek help, or what is the differential between flu and COVID? I know there has been behaviour change since the pandemic, where normally we would just troop on with a bit of a cold, and now we're far more aware of ourselves and not wanting to pass viruses on. So also, what is the advice with that in light of the fact that there are no legal restrictions anymore? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So with regards to the first question, so learning and gaining best practice from other areas. So like I say, as a public health team, we meet regularly with UKHSA, and we will share, I think it's primarily through journal articles actually from around the world. So people will publish their findings, and I think it's very important that we review the content of those. We always look to see if there's any shared learning, and of course, and then decide what's right for our own population. So by the time it gets down to me, I'm concerned with Hertfordshire residents and the demographics of our population here, and whether it's actually appropriate to advise that same advice here within Hertfordshire. And if it is, then that's something I'd certainly take forward. We certainly put out regular comms, and we've got a public facing health protection website now that we can put regular messaging on. But I am always very critical, I think, of papers and things that are produced across the world, because of course it's very different depending on country to country, and taking in different cultures and health beliefs, of course, on whether the advice that was given in Spain would actually make an impact in the UK, for example, very different culture. Hopefully that answers that question. And for the second question, with regards to not testing anymore, it's very, very difficult. So I'm doing lots of work to try and empower members of the public around symptom awareness. I think that's the most important thing. There are lots of overlapping symptoms between COVID and flu. However, generally we've seen that COVID is a milder disease. So you may just have cold-like symptoms of a sore throat. It's not that specific, whereas flu can be quite specific. I don't know if anybody's ever had flu, but it's very, very nasty. It'll actually, you can't get out of bed, or you haven't just got a runny nose, you know if you have flu. There is no test for flu, and of course we may not have testing for COVID. So it's just around that general well-being, symptom awareness, and knowing when to call the GP. So working with NHS colleagues, we do lots of updates to our website, lots of signposting, and of course we've got the winter health booklet that's going to go through every door this winter. That's just being finalised now, and there's lots of really practical advice in that for our residents, tailored at a correct level to tell people this is flu, this is what you do, this is what we're doing to support you, this is COVID, this is what you can do, and this is what we're doing to support you.
And sorry, the winter health booklet, which I'm sure will be very useful to many residents. I'm sure members will get that, an email PDF version. It's going to be a very big leaflet, Chairman, that goes out from cross-party with all helpful advice for our residents. But it will come to all members as well, so that we can help to disseminate that through our communities electronically or via social media.
Absolutely. And if I can just follow on, I'm conscious I probably didn't fully answer Sunny's question around some of our underserved communities. I don't like to say hard to reach, because they are easy to reach, they're just underserved. So our gypsy and traveller communities, as an example, are homeless. for both the winter health booklet and health advice and the COVID vaccination. We have dedicated work streams still set up for those communities. So we will physically go out as a public health team and we will do on the ground work to promote the vaccination, take the vaccination to those people. And that's already started this week in homeless shelters. And likewise, once we have the winter health booklet, bless you, once we have the winter health booklet, we'll physically take that out and we'll talk about and promote health advice as well.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm going to start drawing this to a conclusion now, just to remind. Oh, Judy, sorry, Judy, got you there.
Sorry, I was late in again, and it was entirely your fault because you said something that made me suddenly have a question. When you said about the efficacy of vaccination being 65%, that led me to a question that I'd like to ask, because having had 4 vaccinations and then at the end of July getting COVID, which I've managed to avoid for 2 years and 4 months, and I thought I was really clever and I wasn't, and I was so poorly that I was clearly the only person who'd ever had this nasty disease, and that's how I behaved, as my family will tell you. So my question is, what do we mean by efficacy? Because what does 65% mean? Because had I not had my 4 vaccinations, would I not have died? So doesn't that mean that the vaccinations are actually 100% effective compared to where we were before we had the vaccinations? Because I didn't on this occasion die.
And hopefully you won't for some time to come. It's the efficacy of flu. The flu vaccine's only about 2/3. Other people catch it. It's the efficacy of the COVID vaccinations about 85–90%. But as you rightly say, if you hadn't had it at all, would you have been much, much worse? Or by at least catching it after you've had, like I did in July, caught it at the LGA conference of all places. It's all about a super spreader. I got a free pen, a free bottle, and a free dose of COVID from that. Would I have been worse off? And I think the answer to that is yes. But I'll take a quick answer from Geraldine.
Absolutely. So the efficacy could be defined by the fact that you had a much milder illness compared to if you had not had your vaccination. And certainly one of the main aims of the COVID vaccination programme is to prevent morbidity and certainly mortality. So we've seen the death rate decline rapidly since the introduction of the COVID vaccination programme. So the efficacy for COVID vaccination certainly is yes, to prevent death and severe illness, not only the spread and catching the virus.
What's the difference between morbidity and mortality?
Mortality, thank you.
Sorry. I go into nursey language sometimes. So morbidity is the severity of your symptoms, the condition, and unfortunately mortality is actually death, so how likely you are to die.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. I really suspect that everyone asking questions have been asking about themselves here, because Judy's been asking about hers. I know that Reno, like me, is a bit of a hypochondriac, and I do think it's odd that you've got the public health community cabinet member and deputy, who are probably the 2 biggest hypochondriacs in Hertfordshire. So there we go. And Sunny doing a bit of research there. Colleagues, thank you very much indeed for that update, Geraldine. Did you used to be a nurse? There you go. Okay, take that away with me. It's up there in my head. We're asked to note the content of the report. Are we all happy to do so? Yes. Yes, thank you very much indeed. It's been a 2.5-hour meeting. There's been a lot of detail today. I'm very grateful to all those colleagues who've attended and have contributed, and particularly to all our officers, for Carly, for her note taking. And as I've said, I always find this a very useful panel, and I'm grateful for everyone's contribution today. I look forward to seeing you all here or online healthily as soon as we meet again. In the meantime, enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much indeed.